Task 1 is what they call an information transfer. So you're given visual information, and, well, not you, the candidates are given visual information, and they have to transfer that visual information into written text. And they're asked to describe it and make comparisons. That's it. So it's a rather unusual sort of task, I think, because normally, if we're given some data in a table or a graph, we're going to interpret that data. We're going to think about possible reasons and explanations for trends. None of that in IELTS. If they do that, it's removed as off-topic, and it just doesn't count at all. It doesn't even count in the number of words. Yeah, which is a bit severe, but that's the way it is. Even good writers, they can get a rather low score because they don't understand the requirements of the test. But it does say describe and make comparisons. So no interpretation. Another point is they may have one graph, two graphs, up to four. And a lot of candidates, naturally I think, look for correlation between the two graphs. And they spend a lot of time, effort, and they actually manage to get some sort of correlation. They force it between these two graphs, but very often there is no correlation. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. Mostly there isn't. So that's another area many of good writers trip up on. They spend too much time and effort trying to relate the two graphs. Again, I think it's a natural thing to do. Normally if we're given graphs, we try to correlate the data, and we try to interpret it, but none of that. So you have that that visual information, and you just transfer that to a written text. That's it. Describing and make comparisons. Okay. So let's have a look at a couple, and we'll see the different types we have. Writing. So if we turn to page 45, we can see an example.
Do we write in these books or no?
They're the school's books, so I don't know. Probably better not to. Yeah. Good question.
You said 45?
45. Yeah. Probably better not to write in them. So they'll be nice and clean for the next ones. Yeah, page 45. Okay, we have an example here. This is pretty typical. It's a single bar graph, but we'll just flip through it and give you an idea of the range. Over the page 48, we have a table, very common as well. 49, we have two graphs. This is what I was talking about. There's no direct correlation between them. They're both related to tourism, but there's no obvious correlation there. And if we turn over the page to 50, we have three graphs. And in this case, we have past and future. So candidates do need to pay attention to the dates to see whether they should use present, past or future forms.
Which is very hard for Japanese speakers.
Can be.
Mixing verb tenses
Yes,
is a serious
right.
challenge for mid-level speakers.
Exactly. Then page 51, we have a bar graph again with past and future. Then over the page in 52 we have something different. This is a flow chart, how something's made. Then we have, on the next page, we have a process. Is that a process, a flow chart? Well, yeah, let's call it a process. Then 54, we have maps. And over the page, maps again. And 57, floor plans. And 58, last one, I think, how something works. So a water clock, and then the last one over the page, a refrigerator. So, a lot of candidates have it in their minds that IELTS Task 1 is a graph. So they work hard on describing graphs and they ignore maps, flow charts, how something works. And they're likely to be quite lucky because in my experience and talking to my students, I always ask them, what did you get in your writing? It seems to me that about 80% of the time it's a table or some sort of graph or a number of graphs. And the illustrations, the maps, flow charts, floor plans, how something works, seem to be about 20% of the time, I would say. So when you're teaching, you do need to focus on the graphs, but you shouldn't entirely ignore the others. I remember at the British Council, we used to be involved in the testing there, and if it wasn't a graph, it was one of the other types, you'd say to them, all right, please turn over your papers. They turn over their paper and they see this map or something. A gasp would go out across the room. They're just not prepared for it at all and didn't know where to start. And the scores were definitely lower.
That was going to be my question.
Yeah. But actually, the approach is fundamentally the same. So it's not completely different. And a little bit of practice with that and they'll be fine with it. They just need to be aware of what's required and aware that many of them are not even aware they exist. They need to be aware that they exist. Okay, any questions so far? So, all right. Then, let's go back to where we were, page 45, and let's have a look at how the question's structured. So, 20 minutes. In the actual exam, as you said, they do have 1 hour. But they advise them to spend 20 minutes on task 1 and 40 minutes on task 2. But what they don't do, they don't actually tell people, all right, now start task 2. It's for the candidate to time it themselves. I'll mention this now, otherwise I might forget. Which brings me on to time management. Yeah, many of the candidates struggle to write the required number of words in an hour. They're just slow. And they run out of time. Now, if they do task 1, then task 2, they run out of time, it means their task 2 has no conclusion. That's a serious problem. They're not going to get a good score without a conclusion. So I generally recommend my students to do task 2 first and then task 1. Then if they run out of time, So the last bit of data is not covered. Well, that's not too big a problem compared to no conclusion. So I think that's a good exam strategy for most of our students. You do occasionally come across people who are very quick and it's not a problem for them to write the required number of words, and they practice and they got the timing down, but it's pretty rare. Most of them, they run out of time. Okay, then let's have a look at the question here. So we've got the rubric. You spend 20 minutes on this chart. Then you've got the explanation of the chart, graph, map, whatever it might be. Then you have the rubric again, summarise the information, selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. And then write at least 150 words. So our students should be familiar with the rubric before they go in that room. So they needn't waste time reading that. It never changes. Well, I say never. It hasn't changed for the last 15 years. So it's a safe bet that's going to be the same. So they needn't waste their time reading that, but they do need to read the explanation very carefully. Sometimes they're in a bit of a panic, they've struggled to write enough words and they want to get started immediately. They don't read it properly and then they go off topic, and if they go off topic, that section will be removed. So they do need to read the explanation carefully. And they need to study the graph carefully. Okay. Now, main features. They have to cover the main features. I think that's pretty obvious for most students, but there are students who seem to struggle with that. So the main features, I tell them, are of course the highest and the lowest, the extremes. Of course, they're main features, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, in a case like this, the second highest, the second lowest. Yeah. If it's a line graph, the starting point and the finishing point are main features. And
peaks
the little
lows.
And the peaks and the lows, exactly. Yeah. Starting, finishing, peaks, lows. But you will find you'll have a number of students who don't seem to realise that, and they miss out the starting point, or they miss out the finishing point, and they describe some little fluctuation in the middle in great detail. So it depends on the person.
Now, describing something minute in detail might be a waste of time. Would it be negative points, or just doesn't score you anything?
Well, it will score in other marking criteria, but in task achievement, it wouldn't, because they haven't described the main features. So in one part of the marking criteria, they would be penalised for failing to cover the main points. If they write a lot and they cover the main points and some minor things as well, then that's okay.
No, they wouldn't subtract this.
No.
That question.
No.
Well.
That's right, they wouldn't, no. But they would lose for not covering main points. And make comparisons where relevant. The reason they use where relevant is because with some of the illustrations, I don't know, perhaps a flow chart, comparisons are just not relevant occasionally. But in a graph, they're virtually, if not always, relevant. So they should try to include comparisons. Superlatives, the highest, the lowest, and also higher, lower. And they should try to, if they're capable of it, add some more advanced comparisons, like twice as high as a threefold increase, that kind of comparison as well. We have these three boxes down the bottom here, and this is the stages they go through. So first, as I said, they carefully read the explanation and the chart, study the chart and graph. Then they, actually it's not written here, they can, if they feel it's necessary, they can circle what they consider to be the main points to make sure they don't omit them later on, so they're there in front of them. Then they need to decide how to divide this. Now, the next stage, they need to construct their writing into paragraphs, introduction and body paragraphs. And the body paragraphs should be topical. So before they start writing, they need to look at the data, the chart diagram, and decide how they're going to divide that into body paragraphs. It might be two, it's generally two. Sometimes three is more appropriate. So 2 or 3 body paragraphs, topical. Sometimes it's very easy. You get 2 maps, and they got different dates. Well, then maybe I could write about this one in my first body paragraph and this one in my second body paragraph. Sometimes less obvious. In this one, less obvious, I would say, but if possible, we want 2 topical paragraphs. Any suggestions on how you might divide that data into 2 topical body paragraphs?
I might be misunderstanding. I would do kind of 1 paragraph just on describing the graph, and then a second paragraph making comparisons.
Okay, I've seen that.
That's a different structure though than what you were describing. So I'm having a hard time visualizing.
Yeah, I've seen that done, and I've seen it done with some success. It is an option. It's not one I ever go for myself. The reason is, what can happen is, in order to do that, you start describing the same data, but from a different angle, certainly. But you're describing the same data, so you end up writing more. Most of our students struggle, as I said, to write enough words. So they're likely to run out of time. And another point is, in IELTS you'll be penalised for repetition. If something's repeated, it will be taken out, ignored. And many of them end up writing virtually repetition with 1 or 2 different words. Although that is a strategy, but it's quite a bit of a difficult one.
Risky one. Yeah. You said penalized. Penalized in negative points, or penalized by just having to take it out?
They'll be penalised for repetition, and the repetition will be removed. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, it'll be removed.
Okay.
Yeah. And those words won't count to the word count. Same as off-topic repetitions taken out. So we want a topical paragraph, and you want to be able to introduce the topic of the paragraph by saying something like, looking first at, so we need what we're going to look at.
The top 3 countries?
I think so. It's quick and easy, yeah? So look at, with this one, one way to divide it would be to have a body paragraph with the countries with the higher percentages and lower percentages. Then we can make 2 topical paragraphs. Now what the candidates cannot do is sit there agonising over this and thinking about it for a long time. They have to make a decision quickly. So whatever sort of stands out, that's the one to go for. Just all right, then they start writing. Write their introduction first. Now you'll notice the arrows go in 2 directions, and it's a complete circle. The reason for this is when we're given a writing task, we don't do stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 with a clean break between. What we tend to do, certainly stage 1, stage 2, but while we're doing stage 2, we might go back to stage 1. And while we're actually writing, we might want to look at the question again and make sure we're still on task. So that's why these arrows go in 2 directions. Because that's the writing process most people go through, back and forth. All right, any questions on that? Okay, let's have a look at an actual writing.
Oh, wait, I do have a question.
Yep.
You mentioned some students might do it by geography. We are allowed to use real-world information not included in the chart. If I happen to know that Turkey is in Central Asia, I'm certainly allowed to use that.
Yes,
Cool.
yes, yes. Good question.
Thank you.
That's a good point, actually, while you've raised that. It's not just related to this, but if you look at me. Real world knowledge, including that, is fine if it's general knowledge, you know, sort of thing everyone would know. But if you start including technical or obscure details, which is not given in the chart, that might be removed as off topic. Okay, then let's have a look. First we write our introduction. So perhaps I'll just leave you to read this page. I'll give you a few minutes to read that. I think it's pretty much self-explanatory. So, first we write our introduction by, as Chris said, by paraphrasing their introduction, and we can also introduce some extra data as it appears, not like bar graph in their introduction. They use charts. We can add some detail like bar graph. And we can also bring in some detail from the graph. So in their introduction they don't mention percentages, but that's in the graph, so I can put that in my introduction. Yeah? So that will make my introduction quite a bit different from theirs, but basically it says the same thing. Then the next part is the overview. This is a requirement of task 1. It sort of replaces a conclusion, really. They have to describe it in broad terms. Now, this can be quite challenging, and some of the overviews you read don't really read like an overview. So I always recommend my students to use a word such as overall. Then, no matter how poorly written their overview is, the examiner will know this is supposed to be an overview, and so an overview is present, even if it's a very poor one, it is there. So that's a useful thing to teach our students. Yeah. Now, the overview can be in the introduction, or it can be at the end. I encourage the students to put it in the introduction. The reason is, as I mentioned earlier, I suggest they do task 2 first and task 1 last. Yeah. Then if they run out of time and they're going to put their overview at the end, there won't be an overview. Task 1 without an overview is a bit of a problem. They'll be penalised quite severely for that. So if they put it in the introduction, it's done. They're not going to forget, they're not going to run out of time, it's done. So it's a strategy to put it in the introduction. And for the markers, it doesn't matter if it's in the introduction or it's at the end, it's the same thing, so long as it's there, either at the beginning or at the end. And I generally advise them to explicitly introduce the topic of their body paragraphs, looking first at, turning to, or regarding, concerning, just explicitly introduce it. It doesn't have to be explicitly introduced. I mean, if the topic of the paragraph is clear from the content to the examiner, then that's fine. But sometimes it's not clear. So if they actually introduce the topic, then the examiner can see he's attempted topical paragraphs, even if he's not been too successful at it. Right. Okay, any questions on that? Then let's turn to the marking criterion. It's on the next page, page 47. We'll have a look at a marking paper now. An answer sheet. Have a look at an answer sheet. Please turn to page 138. So we have task 1, task 2, they're exactly the same, except this says 1 and this says 2. But in the exam, the task 1 is a kind of pinky orangey colour, and task 2 is white. Now the reverse side is the same. Okay, so on page 47 it says task achievement. Here it says TR, task response. This is because they used to use task achievement in task 1 and task response in task 2. But what's the difference? I never did know, and no one was ever able to explain it. So a couple of years ago they changed, and they're both task response now, I think. So anyway, you can see official use only. We have task response, CC, coherent, page 140. Task response, coherence, cohesion, lexical resource, and grammar. I think the reason they use lexical resource rather than vocabulary is vocabulary sounds like a single word. Lexical resource could include single words and phrases, like on the other hand would be lexical resource. I think that's the only reason. But for your students, just tell us vocabulary. We don't need to go into the ins and outs of that. So, vocabulary, phrases go in there. And grammar, they get a score for each. They're equally weighted. Here, there are no half scores. It's from 0 to 9. and then the average is taken to give them their score for task 1. Then the same is done for task 2, and then there's a table. Task 2 carries greater weight than task 1. Mm-hmm. And there's a conversion table. Task 2's down here with the scores, and task 1's across here, and it's a matrix. The examiner marker just goes to the matrix and gives them their final score. So, for example, task 1, he's got 6. Task 2, he's got 6.5, so his overall score is 6.5. Reverse, task 1, he's got 6.5, task 2, he's got 6, so his writing score is 6. Task 1, he's got 5, task 2, he's got 6, his overall score would be 5.5. Yeah, that's the matrix they use. So these final scores in the writing section are 0 to 9 and 0.5s as well. So 0, 0.5, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, and so it goes up to 9. But in these boxes, the examiner only uses full scores, no 0.5s, only complete numbers. Okay, any questions on that? That's all right. Okay, then staying on page 140, let's have a look at the other notes here.
Apologies.
Under length, so if it doesn't reach the required word count, the candidate will be penalised. How much they're penalised depends. So I never tell my students this, but actually, if, for example, in task 1, if they're 5 words under, we cut them that slack. We don't penalise them. One of the reasons I think, this is just my speculation, is that the examiner has to count the words. If I miscount, which is quite likely, I got 20 of these to mark. I'm not going to count them twice. I'm not going to double check. I might miss a word or two. So they've got to give them a little bit of slack. But I don't tell the students that, but that is in fact the reality. Then if they're, say, task 1, 10 words under, they will be penalised, but only in task response. Okay. I'll take a point out of the task response. If, however, they're substantially below, I'm going to take maybe 3 points out of task response. And the other categories, because I don't have sufficient sample to judge, it'd be penalised in the other sections as well, because it's not a sufficient sample. So even if it's well written, few mistakes are still penalising in the other areas. So if they're, where does that line begin? It's really quite subjective for the examiner to decide that. But let's say they're 50 words under, then definitely that's going to affect the rest of the marks. Okay, so a little under, a couple of words, gets through. 10 words, 15 words, task response only. More than that, it's going to start affecting the other categories. So it's crucial, that, especially when they're looking for 7.0, which many of our students are, it's crucial they write enough words. First and foremost, they must write enough words, and they struggle. One reason is they spend too much time in the planning stage. Another reason is they put too much emphasis on presentation. It's a cultural thing. Yeah? They write it all neat and tidy, and it's all nicely printed, and they make an error, they erase everything and start again, and they run out of time, and they've only got 70 words. They do need to practice at writing within the required time and achieving that number of words. It basically is a question of them practicing, but it's for us to emphasize the importance of that and to motivate them to do that. Okay. Any questions there?
So, if they tend to erase a lot,
Yeah.
would you suggest like have them cross out line right above it?
Yeah, good question. I'll refer you to page 75. Yeah, so you can see E, eraser. Yeah. This is how they should make their corrections. They have to be clear though. I mean, it's scribbly things which I don't know what goes where, but won't do. As I say, the examiners have a lot to do in a limited time. They're usually teachers, and I'm marking these, and I've got a class coming off at 7. I'm not going to spend time trying to figure out, well, where does that go? So I suppose, if I don't understand them first time, that's it. It's not good. Yeah, so it needs to be clear. But it doesn't need to be like a final draft.
Yeah.
So, yeah. This saves a lot of time. I've seen people, they write a paragraph, then they realise somewhere in the middle of the paragraph they've missed one word. They'll erase everything that gone after it, write that one word in, and rewrite that paragraph. There's no time for that. When they write, they can print or they can use cursive. That's fine, provided it's clear. Okay. So we also have off-topic. I'll come back to memorise. I'll come back to that in task 2. It's more relevant to task 2, I think. And illegible, self-explanatory. If I can't read a word, it gets taken out of the word. 134. These are what they call the public descriptors. They're available on the internet, British Council site, IELTS sites. The descriptors the examiners use look similar, but they're a lot more detailed, maybe twice as long as this. So this is an abridged version which they release to the public. So you have to share it. So I can find another. And please mark this one. So what I'd like you to do is correct the errors and decide what are the main errors, the ones you'd like to emphasise for this particular student. Tell this student you should focus on, and so select the main errors and please score it. Yes. And you can use your descriptors when you come to the scoring. So first mark it, then decide what advice you would give this student and give them a score.